I had been shaking and screaming, "Give me an epidural," the entire time. Hi guys, this is Leo, my son. You haven't seen him yet, but he is 4 months old. I'm gonna be Hi! I'm gonna be telling the story about my birth with this child here. Oh my. Okay. Well, anyway, I had a very tough birth with him, as you can tell by the title of this video. It was not fun, but yeah, but I'm going to tell you why I would never, ever in my freaking life have a midwife again. Yeah, look at the camera. From the beginning, I was 37 weeks when I went into labor. But prior to that, from like 35 weeks, I believe, I was having contractions, and they were just like Braxton Hicks, so it wasn't the biggest deal. But then slowly at like 37 weeks, I was having intense pains, like couldn't breathe through them. Like it was so bad, I was crippling, like falling to my knees. And so I would go in all the time. I'm sure they all loved me there. I could tell the nurses were starting to get like really annoyed with me. But this boy did not want to stay inside me. So anyway, they were sure he was like head down. I was always on the contraction monitor, and it was like insane, up and down, like I was having contractions nonstop. But I wasn't dilating, so there wasn't really anything that they could do, and they weren't gonna put me on pitocin when I was only 35 weeks. But anyway, are you happy? Okay, but anyway, at 37 weeks, I went in 2 different times, and I was having contractions that were really close together. I don't remember the times, but I was writing them down and constantly on the phone with the nurses. And they told me to come in the 2 times, and I was dilated at 3 centimeters. At that point, they couldn't admit me because you have to be 4 centimeters to be actually like taken into labor and delivery. And so I was getting so frustrated. At that point, I was constantly going on walks, drinking pineapple juice, doing stuff like that to like get it going. And it like wasn't doing anything. And then later, I think it was the next night, I had gone on a walk, and I came home, and I was sitting down in my bed, and I decided to call labor and delivery because I was like, seriously, I couldn't even breathe. Like I was not being, it was the worst pain in my entire life. And my husband was sitting with me, and we sat there and we were on the phone, and she said, "Let me put you on hold." And as soon as she did that, I felt this gush, and I was like, oh my God, it's my water. No, so it was actually a lot of blood. I remember my mom telling me a story, like saying that her friend had placenta abruption because that's like a sign of it, like having blood. When you're pregnant, like you don't want to see blood. It was like gushing, and finally I just hung up and called right back because I knew I was going to be sitting on hold. And the lady answered the phone. It's okay. Shh. The lady answered the phone, and I told her that I had been gushing blood, and she told me to come down, and I was just screaming blood, like crying in my car, and she's like, well, we can send an ambulance because you clearly, my husband is immigrating, so he couldn't drive me, and I had to drive by myself, which obviously wasn't gonna be an option for him to drive me. But I was like in such a terrible mental state. I thought I had lost my baby. I ended up just saying like no, because the ambulance charges were like, I don't even know how many thousands of dollars. I drove all the way to the hospital, and I obviously was speeding, and once I got there, they had me take off my pants. Like, the blood had been going through onto the seat of the car. She said that the amount was a lot, but she's seen worse. So then they checked me. I think I was 4.5 centimeters at that point. And so they took me into labor and delivery. They were having me do walks around the building, and I was like crippled, falling over, grabbing onto the walls. Like, Aaron, my husband, was just like at a loss of what to do. So it got to the point where I was just like, no, I can't do this anymore. And then so the anesthesiologist came in, and I think this is honestly like one of my biggest regrets. So they asked me if I wanted to do my epidural, and I said yes, because I didn't realize that it could run out. So I said yeah. They told me that it was like in a safe period of time to do it and whatnot. The anesthesiologist came in and he started giving me my epidural. During this time I had all like back labor pains, so it was really hard for me to sit still, because if any of you have gave birth, it's not like when you're having a contraction, you just lose your mind. He's trying to put it in my back, and he notices that I have scoliosis. I had no idea that I had that. So what I think happened is that he gave me an epidural, and something with my spine, the way it would, like, he had to redo it a million times. So he was having difficulty, and it ended up working. I can't tell you how many hours it was, but in total I was in labor for almost like 3 days. So like at the hospital and going through contractions, not pushing. Once you get the epidural, I think that's when you can't eat, and I realized that I hadn't ate for like the 2 days prior, because I was constantly contracting and just I was focusing on how terrible I felt rather than taking care of myself. Once I got the epidural, I believe it affects the way you dilate, how fast you dilate. I don't know, maybe. I think that's what they told me. And so I actually stopped dilating when they finally put me in like my room that I was I gave birth in. And I was there forever, it seemed like. I couldn't sleep, and my husband was sleeping the whole time, basically. When I talked to the midwife and the nurse, my birth plan, I don't know if they even looked at it, but I said that I was interested in having a doctor birth my son, because I just felt more comfortable. I know that they are more for like helping the mom. Well, I don't want to say that because I don't want to piss everyone off in the comments, but they're more like, let's get it done, instead of like lollygagging and trying to do it the natural way. And if you like that, go ahead, I don't care. But it was my first birth, and I at this point wanted it to be over, and I wanted it to be done, and it had already been however long, and I knew that it was just going so slow. Not to mention, during my ultrasound, they had told me that you can still tell, kinda, his belly is super wide compared to the rest of his body, and they told me that that might be an issue with him coming out because of like his belly getting stuck on the way out, and so they said that a C-section might be an option for that. Well, when I was talking to the midwives about me wanting a physician rather than a midwife, they told me that they said that wasn't really an option, because they only use those for emergency situations, which I understand 100%. The day continues, and I'm not feeling anything at this point because I had my epidural, and the whole time I was contracting just fine, and my family was there. It's okay, baby. My family was there, and it was all good, whatever. And so I started feeling some pinching and like back labor, it felt like, in my back again. And obviously when you have an epidural, you can't walk, and whatever. So I was like confused why I could feel pain. And so I had my midwife come in, and I told her that, and I kept saying it because she would just reposition me and say, oh, it's the way you're laying, it's the way you're laying. And I'm like, it's not the way I'm laying. I can tell you that right now. It feels like somebody is taking a freaking knife and dragging it down my spine. And so she kept trying these random things, like putting the peanut ball between my legs and switching me from side to side. And forgot to mention, at this point I had already had they put me on pitocin because I wasn't dilating fast enough. Anyway, my grandma was a labor and delivery nurse, and she told me that when they put you on pitocin, they should be checking you constantly, because sometimes that works in like a matter of minutes for girls. For me it didn't, but so it had been like 3 hours since I had had the pitocin, and a nurse came in, and I was asking her to check me because I hadn't been checked for 3 hours. And so she goes down to check, and she's like, has anyone checked you recently? And I said, no, like they've just been like in and out of the room. And she said, well, I think you're ready to push. And she said, and it looks like you're laying in water. And this whole time I felt this knife down my back, and I'm like, but anyway, so she goes and gets my midwife, and my midwife was like, oh, did her water break? Blah. And I'm like, oh, you didn't think to check that, like when you gave me pitocin? Okay. So she checks, of course my water broke. She even had to go ask somebody. She's like, do you think your water broke? What do you think? My fucking ass is soaked in water. And I think it was at like 7.5 centimeters or something. I don't even know. But they told me I was ready to push. So I get my midwife in, and it's time for me to start pushing. I was talking about how I was feeling that pain, and I kept saying, and I was like, I think my epidural is wearing off. I don't know what's going on. I've never gave birth, but I thought you shouldn't be able to feel anything when you have an epidural. She kept just like ignoring my comments about that, and at that point I was just getting so frustrated, and my labor ended up lasting exactly, I think it was like 11 hours, but 5 of it was actually like, what is that called? I think 5 of it was transition, so when the head is actually ready, like it's on like the brim. And at that point I was just getting so frustrated at the midwife because she was ignoring it, and I'm not kidding you, my family was crying, and I was punching my husband and screaming, grabbing him by the shirt and just going like this in his face and saying like, somebody needs to do something for me. I don't know what to do. I was screaming on the top of my lungs, I'm going to die. Like I mentioned before, I hadn't had sleep for days. Midwife was really good at getting everyone to be like together and like wanting to get it done. I'll give her that. She was amazing at like being like, we can do this, like da da da. But in my mindset, I couldn't, because I knew that I had no sleep, and everyone in the room, like, cause my midwife was between rooms. She had some other lady she was birthing, and so every time my midwife would leave the room, there was probably like 7 people trying to help me, and they would all just stand around and they'd wait for her to come back. So I'm contracting by myself without any help of like them telling me to push, nothing. Every time she was there, everyone was like in action. So I think that's part of why my birth lasted so long as well. Are you tired? Are you tired? It was lasting so long that I was shaking My eyes were fluttering. I was like this. I was grabbing onto the side rails, just screaming. I don't even remember half of it. My cousin was telling me about it. I was going to have them record it before I knew that it was going to be a disaster. What the hell was that? And I kind of wish I would have, but I had been shaking and screaming, "Give me an epidural," the entire time. And no one cared. Like, it was like they weren't listening to me. My midwife was going, ha, 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 like just smiling, ha, you look like Elsa, because I had two Dutch braids in with blonde hair, and then she was asking me, oh, where do you get your eyelashes done? And I'm like, seriously, at this point, I had been just completely lost hope. I was telling them, I'm done, like I'm not gonna push anymore, because what was happening was that his head would like come like out, and then it was done for me to push, because she only wanted me to push for, I think it was 10 seconds, and so he would go out, and then she would say, okay, don't push, and then so he'd come back in, and this was going on, like just this out, back in, out, back in. It wasn't progressing, like his head wasn't coming out further, it was just the top part of his head, and that was going on, I don't know, maybe like an hour or two, and it was just frustrating for me, and I can't describe to you the amount of pain it was, and it's not even like funny at all to me. I seriously, it made me never want to have a baby again, and everyone kept telling me, you're gonna forget the pain, like you're gonna forget the pain, and I will never ever forget it. It was seriously the worst thing in the entire world. So at this point, I told her, I'm not gonna do, like I can't do anything. I don't know what you want me to do. Earlier, the nurses had told me that I was going to be getting an epidural. So a second epidural, like the anesthesiologist was going to fix where the needle was, because what happened, I think, is that the placement of the needle moved, and I got seriously so excited. I was like, oh, really? And everyone in the room was like so happy, like my mom and everyone. And so then my midwife came back, and I was like, I'm gonna get an epidural. When can I get my epidural now? And she was like, you're not getting an epidural. Like, she was like, sweetie, like you're not getting an epidural. Like, why do you give a shit if I have an epidural? She is so obsessed with natural birth that she wouldn't let me do what my beliefs are, and I don't understand how that's legal. I don't think it is. Every single person is telling me, you can sue for that, you can sue for that. They're like not listening to you. Everyone else was on board. The anesthesiologist was outside of the door waiting to give me it. It came down to it that she wouldn't let me have it. And I told her, like, my whole body was like just dead. I had never felt this kind of, like, I could barely lift my arms, so tired. And my husband was just like at a loss for what to do. He was just sitting there like, there's nothing, and I was just screaming in pain still. Keep in mind, the whole time I was asking for a C-section. I was asking her to cut me. I was asking her to use the clamps, anything to get him out. The doctor, when I was pregnant, told me that my baby was going to be small and that it wasn't going to be hard to have him, because yeah, my hips are like super narrow, but it turns out that he actually was a very large baby. He is almost 8 pounds, which isn't a lot, but when I was 90 something pounds before I got pregnant, that is a lot to push out. She denied all my requests for any of that the whole time, and I was starting to lose faith, so I just laid there, and I told her that I didn't know what to do, and I told her that I was gonna accept that I was dying. Like, that just sounds so dramatic, but I swear to God, I thought I was gonna die. You finished? Oh, good job. At this point, they had discovered that with me flailing my arms around and everything, that my IVs in my arm had gone under my skin, and all of like the fluid had been going, because they weren't focusing on that kind of stuff. So my arms were like this big, like way up here big, and they didn't know what to really do about that, so they just like repositioned the IV, and they were just noticing little stuff like that, like I was moving too much and causing issues because I was in pain. And at this point, I don't know, I think there might have been something going on with my heart rate, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm not kidding, I hardly remember this stuff because my mind I was hardly there. And so anyway, Leo's heart rate had dropped to 60, and his average heart rate was like 150. So that was like starting to get like danger zone. I don't really know all of that, but they told me like he needs to get out now, and she was still depending on me to do this. And I told her, I was like, I don't know what to do. I did try pushing once they told me that, but he wasn't coming out. Like, it wasn't possible. Everyone in the room knew it. All the nurses knew that he was too large for me to push. She asked me, do you want me to cut you? And I'm like, no, just been asking for that for like 5 hours, but yeah, no, you don't need to cut me. Like, bitch, I have asked you that how many times now? Then she decided to, then she said, well, let's just try without it. Keep in mind, his heart rate is at 60, and she still wants me to push him out when I had already tried for like 8 hours. Okay, so then she cuts me, and of course she does the most minuscule cut in the entire world. Doesn't work, obviously. Then she cuts me again, and because of all the pressure, he was pushing up on the exit, she like cut it a little bit more, and I don't remember this, but everyone told me, geez boy, everyone told me that he flew onto the table, like just straight at me because there was so much pressure, and because like she cut it, and there was all that pressure there as well. It ended up being a 4th-degree tear, which to this day I do not regret. She told me before, she's like, you know you're gonna tear, and I'm like, do you think I give a shit if I tear? I'm literally on the verge of death, it feels like. I don't care if I tear. So he came out, and don't ask me a question because I don't remember it. My husband told me that they set him on me, and there is a bunch of pictures taken that I don't remember happening, and just things like that. Like, I guess that I got stitched up without any anesthesia, and I don't know, it's really sad for me because I really wish I would know that moment, because I know that that's like such a special moment for people when they first meet them, and it really hurts me that I didn't get to see that or feel that. And the pictures of me, I will insert them. And like every single one of the pictures, I look miserable, and I'm looking down at him just like this. Like, I did not care, and it really upsets me, but I guess there's nothing I can do about it, and it is partially my fault because I should have pushed harder for a physician. And also, bad thing that came out of it is that from now on I cannot have a natural birth, but at the same time I know that I can't because I'm just too, I don't want to say like, well, I guess, I mean, it really depends on the size of the baby, but I just didn't know, I knew that my body wasn't able to do it, and it's really unfortunate, and maybe that's why it didn't happen, just because of my doubt. But yeah, from now on I do have to have C-sections, and I don't know. A bad thing that happened was my stitching was done incorrect. My stitches had come out like 4 times, and my doctor was just kept asking me like, who did this, and he would like look back in the system and he saw, and he's like, well, he thinks the midwife helped or something, I don't know, but yeah, they were done very poorly, and to this day, I won't go into detail, but it is not a pleasant feeling, and I feel like I'm not healed. He's 4 months old, and nothing feels right, so I don't know. Moral of the story, stick to your birth plan, be aggressive, although that didn't really work for me, because my midwife apparently thinks that it's her own birth and that she wants to follow what she likes to do. And the other thing is, listen to your, not always, but some of you, listen to your mom. My mom told me, do not have a midwife, and I had a midwife, and I'm sure they're not all the same. Well, I'm positive they're not all the same. I've heard amazing stories about midwives before, but I know that some of them are so caught up on what they want, and they want to do the natural way. They want to do it their way, and it's not about them. They don't understand that it's the woman's choice and whoever is having the baby. If I want to have an epidural, I have every right to have one. It's not your decision, and oh, it just irritates me so much just thinking about it. But long story short, yeah, I mean, just stick to what you want and don't let them tell you what to do. But yep, so this is Leo, and I don't regret a minute of anything that happened. I love him, and I keep in mind, I'm not saying that I'm not grateful for anything. I know that women struggle with infertility and things like that, and I'm definitely grateful that I got to have this cute little pumpkin. Yes, thank you for watching, and have a good day. Say bye, Leo.